just to start off, because of time, I would like to go ahead and just ask each one of you, of the panelists, to introduce yourself, just share with us the work that you're doing and where you're from, so that we can now start the discussion around AfCFTA role in industrialization and development of Africa. So I'll start off with you, Mr. Waleed, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, and thank you very much. My name is Waleed Zomor. I used to be one member of the Egyptian negotiating team since the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area till the signing of the agreement in March 2018. After the signing, then I shifted to work as independent consultant for trade policies, export promotion. I used to work with UNECA, DIF, and several other international institutions. Beside this, my work, I established my own company. Having traveling all over Africa, I saw the potential of medical services and the amount of lost opportunities that we are having within the continent. So I established my own business of medical service company that guide African patients to have treatment inside the continent, not outside. Before that, I used to work at the commercial attaché of Egypt in several embassies around the world. I worked in Brussels, New York, London, and the last one was in Addis Ababa. This is in brief my work. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Waleed, and for that introduction and the background in trade. And I look forward to hearing more around the potential of medical services on the continent, because from our experience, even us here in Kenya and East Africa, we find that a lot of people get medical services outside the continent. So there's great opportunity. So I look forward to hearing more and your insight on that. I'd like to go ahead now and have Ms. Yavi just give us a 2-minute introduction about who you are and the work that you're doing on the continent. Welcome, Yavi.
Thank you, Anne. Well, according to yesterday's or the day before yesterday's news, the Kenyans can now come to South Africa for your medical treatments without issues. And on that note, so I'm not in South Africa, so it's about 6 o'clock my time. So please excuse me if I've got too many lights on and it's right. I'm the executive director of PABWA, the Pan-African Business Women's Association, as you said, the think tank for economic transformation of Africa. We have a special focus on women and youth, but also I am the co-founder of the recently launched $1 billion Africa Prosperity Fund, which was launched by President Nana Akufo-Addo at the Global Citizen Festival in Accra last month. And that is focused on driving industrialization and literally creating African billionaires in the right way and for the right reasons in terms of investment into Africa. My favorite saying is that Mother Nature blessed Mother Africa in a sisterhood long before the sisterhoods even existed, with riches beyond our wildest imaginations. So as a mother myself to a next generation, I'm embarrassed that I cannot hand over a continent that is wealthy and is according to what is in our ground, so to speak, what has been naturally blessed to this continent. And we have to change that in our lifetime. And that is what my life's work is about. Right now, actually, where I am and what I'm doing is actually very critical to the future of trade and the future of AfCFTA on the continent. I'm chairing the African Union Free Movement Protocol sensitization sessions, the FMP and MPFA, which is the Free Movement Protocol and the Migration Policy Framework of Africa in itself, which determines the success of the AfCFTA and how well it will be a success, and trade in general, not just under the AfCFTA. Just in terms of a landmark event, you know, we spoke about South Africa and Kenya having no visas in terms of 90 days, etc., etc. So what that means is that simply it means that when you say free movement, it's not really free. It simply means no visas. It doesn't mean there's not going to be borders. It means that the borders are friendly. It means that the borders welcome each other in terms of our brotherhood and sisterhood and not treat each other as enemies. And that, for me, is where the crux of the AfCFTA lies. And the work that we focus on and the work that we are doing is how do we create the unity behind the AfCFTA that it was intended for and it was created for. And all of these policies, regulations, processes have to be looked at in terms of that and not just looking at it from one perspective. And then just obviously, lastly, just in terms of the fund and the areas of focus that we focus on, and Ms. Boholo spoke about it in terms of funding and looking at it from an investment perspective, is that we've got 10 ring-fenced funding areas under the African Prosperity Fund, and that is environmental sustainability in terms of climate change, youth inclusion, which we call Y, the AfCFTA Intra-Africa trade, digitalization and technology, healthcare, entrepreneurship, African industrialization and wealth creation, food and food security and agriculture, infrastructure development, education and evolution. So that is what is keeping me busy and out of trouble. And yeah, that is what is the focus areas in terms of PABWA and the African Prosperity Fund. Thank you for having us, Anne.
All right, thank you, Yavi. And yes, I do have to say I'm very excited with the news yesterday that I can come to South Africa, at least for 90 days as a business person without worrying about visas, because that has been a great big issue. In fact, I was there in October and I had a conference and literally I got my visa a couple of hours before I flew out. So now I'm very excited that the fact that I am traveling on the continent from Kenya to South Africa, and as long as I'm doing business and I'm going to be there less than 90 days, I don't have to worry about that. So that is great to hear. And I'm also loving the fact that you're doing great work as a change maker on the continent, the Africa Prosperity Fund, and I look to hear more about that as we make sure that we're working in the ecosystem to make sure that trade is happening on the continent and beyond. So thank you very much for that introduction. I'll go ahead and also welcome Mr. Hermogene from AfCFTA. If you could just share with us a little bit about your background and the work that you're doing at AfCFTA, and then we can go into the discussion of the day. So welcome, Mr. Hermogene.
Well, thank you, Anne. As Hermogene, I have a PhD in chemistry. Actually, I did it in South Africa. Yavi, you should be happy. I did it in South Africa at Wits University. Then I was a lecturer of chemistry, a researcher in Botswana, Rwanda, South Africa, in area of chemistry. I joined the Africa Organization for Standardization 2012. Yeah, our work deals with developing standard, harmonization of standard on the continent and harmonization of conformity assessment. We are looking forward to have one standard for our continent and see how there is movement of products, I mean goods and services at the continental level, reducing the technical barrier to trade. That is our work in this area. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hermogene. That is really great to hear that, because standards, that's the issue mostly of the business community when they're trying to trade. So really the work that you're doing is great, and I look to hear more, to listen more about that. So I'll start off with you, Mrs. Yavi. The first question that I have for you is, can you share more about the work you're doing to ensure the implementation of the AfCFTA? I'd like you to just focus on the AfCFTA because I know you do a lot more work. Yes, so that is really the first question that I have, especially pushing industrialization of more African countries, because we know that's a major issue. And I would like you to speak more also around the diversity of women and youth to be included there, whether it's in the leadership, whether it's in the business community, whether it's in government. If you could share more about the work that you do, and we can go ahead with this conversation around the AfCFTA role in industrialization and development of Africa. So welcome, Yavi.
Thank you, Anne. So I'm just going to give you some highlights, and I'll talk about one thing in particular, just so that we obviously keep it short and keep it tight. I'll start with the latest. Is that obviously now I'm busy with the FMP, but just prior to that, in August this year, we were the only organization that submitted, or as far as I know, that submitted a policy brief on the, as you know, the negotiations for the various protocols are underway. The investment one, as Ms. Bokolo spoke about, has been concluded, but the Women and Youth in Trade protocol is still part of the second phase of the negotiations. We were the only ones who submitted a policy brief, and we just started the research. And as you can imagine, we had to do a lot of research on the ground, purely because it's with cross-border traders. And we started it literally a month before COVID started. So it was a very long 2 years of research to do and to finalize that policy brief. It should have taken us 6 months. It took us 2 years and a bit. But I think what it did was, because it took a longer time and because we had to reach out digitally, it actually became a nightmare to deal with. But because of that, we were able to access more people. Actually, we were able to access various levels. We were able to access different types of, the actual stuff that was happening on the ground, and the craziness, if I can put it that way, of the fact that people were no longer allowed to move around, and what that did to the women and youth on the ground. So from a cross-border trade perspective, our policy brief gave us more than we bargained for. But I just want to talk about it in 2 seconds, is that when we looked at it, one of the biggest things that emerged out of the policy brief, or out of the research, and it's in the policy brief, is what we call the precursors. And it wasn't intended to be part of the policy brief. I mean, a policy brief is a very general structure. It's nothing, nothing special. You kind of just provide the research, plug it into the various places, and that's where it is. And then we were put into a corner, pushed into a corner, where we looked at it, and there needed to be certain things, or preconditions rather, that needed to be in place before certain aspects of the AfCFTA, specifically the Women and Youth in Trade Protocol, could be implemented. So those preconditions / precursors, and there's 8 of them that we picked up. Obviously, there could be more. We looked at the ones, we had to go according to the research, and that is what, that told us that there are these 8 preconditions that need to be resolved. The one needed to be, it's completely urgent and critical, and actually have it marked in red in the policy brief, and that is corruption, insecurity, and gender-based harassment and violence against women and their children that are traveling across the borders for the purposes of cross-border trade. So this was the biggest issue. They also highlighted it as some of the, it's life-threatening. The other 7 are limited access for finance for women, and we know that this is one of the biggest on the continent. I mean, that's why Regal Africa Group exists, is that, access to finance for women is just almost impossible in certain parts of the continent. Measurement, monitoring, and evaluation. So we've got all these lovely policies. It's the true African way to have lovely policies and documents and all of those kind of things. But implementation and then monitoring and evaluation is elusive to us in most cases. And therein lies the gaps for corruption, et cetera, et cetera. The continued exclusion of the informal sector of the African economy. So we look at the African economy, we only take into account the formal sector. However, 70% across Africa, as you know, comes from the informal economy, because certain small countries rely mostly on the informal economy. So us, by looking at it and only including the formal sector, we are actually by default excluding women, because women make up 80% of the informal economy. So we don't have an understanding of their value contribution. And because we don't have an understanding of their value contribution, we don't pay attention to their issues, challenges, and the things that arise. like sexual harassment and violence at cross-border trade posts. Inconsistent gender mainstreaming across countries. So for example, I just want to give this to you very quickly, is that 2010-2020 was the African Women's Decade declared by African Union in 2010 at the summit. We got 0.000 outcome out of 10 years of a decade that was declared and accepted and ratified by all heads of state. We are now sitting in the second year of the African Women's Decade of Financial and Economic Inclusion. We're almost in year 3. We have no idea where we are. Yes, absolutely, the deputy chairperson, yes, absolutely, the gender directorate is telling us that there's things coming, but we are in year 3, so we are 1/3 of the way through. So there is inconsistent gender mainstreaming because we can't even get the information out of certain countries to tell us where they are with their policies and processes. For example, procurement was meant to have been at least 33% to women-owned businesses from public sector. Nobody knows what it is across the continent. Only 3 countries have submitted their figures, and it's way below 10%. And the last is that it's poor or non-existent infrastructure and basic facilities for women when it comes to cross-border trade. And I'm specifically now speaking to the cross-border traders and not you and I that are sitting in our offices or in our hotel rooms. I'm talking specifically the ones that are sitting at the borders who have like simple things like there's no toilets, there's no safety areas or safe spaces for them to be. And all of those kind of things create issues that cannot be controlled. So these were some of the preconditions that came out that said, if we don't have these kind of things that are at least at a majority or at least have started on the continent in some shape or form, how is the AfCFTA protocol on women and youth in trade going to actually be implemented? And how will it be driven? Because these things these are the conditions in order for it to be able to be built upon. You can't build a house without a strong foundation. So this is just, obviously just an indication of some of the work. The last, I suppose the thing before that is that we are in the second year of the AfCFTA Media Fellowship, where we train media and journalists on the AfCFTA so that they're able to write about it properly, if I can put it that way. And that's just some of the work that we are. You can hear I'm very passionate about it. So it's some of the work that we do.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Yavi. Yes, I can hear your passion. I have followed you. I have seen the work that you're doing. And actually, the last thing that you said really is around communication. It's very important that people know what's going on and how to plug in. And at the same time, also changing the narrative from aid to trade. So that is really important to do that. And like you said, there are very many great policies out there. There's also the work on women and youth protocol, but implementation. So we're going to continuously champion to make sure implementation is happening, and we're monitoring and evaluating what is working, what is not working, to make sure that all of us are involved, men, women, young, and older people on the continent. So thank you, Yavi, very much for sharing the work that you continuously do to champion AfCFTA on the continent. Great. I'll go ahead and now have a discussion with you, Mr. Waleed. So earlier you mentioned the fact that, before the current work that you're doing right now, you've had experience in trade negotiations, putting together trade policies in Egypt. What do you think will ensure the success of AfCFTA to ensure industrialization of Africa? What do you think is the key thing that we need to do to make sure that happens? Welcome.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have spent like 4 years doing hard work, negotiating, and try to reach a formula to liberalize trade among the continent. The intent of the meetings was very high, and finally we reach an agreement. We sign. But having said that the real work did not start yet. The start of the work is when we liberalize our trade. So, and talking about trade and how to increase the intra-African trade, it will be meaningful and it will be really develop our economies when we concentrate on finished or semi-finished goods. So we have to talk about industrialization, and we have one advantage in this area, that African trade with the world include 20% only of finished goods. The intra-African trade, the percentage of finished and semi-finished good is 42%. So we are very good in trading among us with value-added products. Will create a good opportunity after the application of the AfCFTA. So now we are talking about the importance of industrialization. My thinking or my point of view is that there are three main priorities that we have to take into consideration to increase our industrialization. The first one is the competitiveness. The second one is the better infrastructure and trade logistics. The second one, integrated value chain on the continental level. The most important one is the competitiveness. We will increase our industrialization and our trade, intra-African trade, when we increase our competitiveness. Just to give you an idea of the current situation, Africa used to trade in blocks. So the West Bloc, which is ECOWAS, used to trade together, and the South Bloc, which is SADC or SACO, used to trade together, and the East Bloc, which is COMESA or EAC, used to trade together. But do we, apart from these regional blocks, do we trade? I mean, apart from these, do we trade together? The intra-African trade, that is apart from this, not in blocks, like countries that is not member in any blocks, trading with other countries with no trade preferences, represent only 12% of the total intra-African trade, which means that trade in Africa is done on preferential base. Then that's where comes the importance of the CFTA. So when we liberalize our trade, it will give us the opportunity for people, countries from the West or from the East, to trade together. Well, I mean, with the CFTA, we will not have to trade in regional or geographical blocks only. More precisely, the three biggest economies in the continent will start to trade together, which is Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa. And when I'm saying the three biggest economies, I'm not saying that other economies is not important. It's just that these economies will be capable of creating mass, the mass of competitive industrial production, the mass of creating infrastructure and trade logistics, and even the mass to establish shipping lines between our major hubs in the east or north or south. It's not really possible, for example, to ship container from Mombasa to Johannesburg, passing by Dubai or Singapore, which will make it much more, it will take much more time, it will take, of course, much more cost. This is concerning the competitiveness. Concerning the infrastructure, I think this is the most challenging issue for intra-African trade. Just to give you an idea, the financial gap in that need for Africa for infrastructure is $100 billion a year. And I'm not saying that we need $100 billion a year to spend on infrastructure. This is the gap between what we have right now and what it should be. So this is really, I think, the major obstacle to trade in the continent. So what is the solution for this financial gap? I think we should go more to public-private partnership. We should go more into BOT, build, own, transfer, or BOO, build, own, operate. The other thing is that we have to believe in the multiplier effect of infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure will help in trade, will help in investment, will help in tourism. So we have really to take this into consideration. And this will, and when we start spending more on infrastructure, the gain will be more and more. The third one, or the third element, is the integration of value chain in the continent. And I think with the increase of the market access, with the increase of the infrastructure, this by itself will increase the integration in the value chain within the continent. Having said that, one final point that I would like to raise is that in the agreement, we have 3% of exclusion list and 7% of sensitive list that will have longer time to be liberalized. My point of view is that this can be a main obstacle to industrialization, as 3% of exclusion of trade can represent a very big amount of finished or semi-finished goods. So this is in brief what I wanted to say about AfCFTA and industrialization.
Thank you, Mr. Waleed, for sharing your insight and the work that you've been doing. It was quite interesting for you to say that when it comes to finished and semi-finished goods in intra-Africa trade, there is more than globally. So that means there's something we really need to do around positioning African brands, right? Or African products, because we can consume them on the continent, but when it goes global, it seems that we do not sell more finished goods. So we need to really work on that. And you mentioned, of course, competitiveness is very important, infrastructure, investing in that. In fact, that's the work that we do, because we talk about trade and investment. We're mobilizing people not only to trade on the continent, but invest on the continent. So thank you for reminding us about that and integrated value chain. All right, so now, Mr. Hermogene, the next question is for you. So for us and this discussion around AfCFTA, we would like you to share more about the work that you're doing at ARSO, right? What do you think will lead to the implementation of more harmonized standards that leads to more industrialization in Africa? Because that's a big challenge, especially for SMEs who are trying to do more trade across borders, and knowing that if I'm in Kenya, my standards are different from Egypt, different from South Africa. So could you share with us more around the work that you're doing to make sure that that improves industrialization on the continent? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. One key thing that we should understand is that even if you sign an agreement to trade among ourselves, it's not just we are brothers. Any country will protect their own people. It's about standards are about safety, standards are about environment, and then trade. I will not just, as a country, accept a product coming from my neighbor because I signed the AfCFTA. It should be showing that this product, we trade more on agriculture product. Yeah, what is it safe for my people? Yeah, if I am consuming the milk, the meat, the other food products, is safe for my people. If I am accepting cement from Egypt, from South Africa, is it safe for the building that I'm gonna use that cement? The safety is key, and to reach the level where you are sure that the safety is there, it's the application of standards. The application standard is very key. What we are doing when you are harmonizing the standard is to be able to reach what we call 1-1-1 principle. The 1-1-1 principle is to have one standard, one test, one certificate. Can I have one standard that is utilized by African continent? If I conduct a test in Egypt, that product is sent to South Africa, to Kenya, to Rwanda, elsewhere, is not retested because the cost of retesting for the private sector is huge. And it also creates some delays when you are retesting. Mean that we need to have that one standard. That's what ARZO is doing for harmonization of standard. But we also need the second part, the equivalence in technical regulations. Because when you have technical regulation, different technical regulation, it's what creates now the second testing when the product is reaching our borders. Third is acceptability of the results of our laboratories, conformity assessment. Do you accept that the results, I am showing you the results on one product, do you accept it in your country? Meaning you accept the test of that certificate I am giving to you. We cannot reach there if we don't have capacity building in quality infrastructure. It's very important to have the laboratories that are accredited at the continental level. It's very important to have the standardization bodies that are at the level that is acceptable. It's also very important to have the metrology, the measurement that I can trust at the continental level. When you look at, we did some stock taking at the continental level to see how the levels of quality infrastructure are. We still have only among the 55 countries, around 11 countries are the countries that are at a good level where you can accept their product knowing that the tests are good. You can accept those products in your country. 11 out of 55 countries. When you are looking at the AfCFTA, we should remember that the borders are there, but we are breaking those borders. A product will enter one country and can reach other countries. A product will be produced, manufactured in one country and can reach other countries easily. That's what we are looking at. But if now I cannot trust your product, it's a problem. It's a problem. As I said, as I started, it's not about signing. It's about also looking at how safe those products are. And we cannot be there if we don't bring into our structure the quality culture. We shouldn't remember that we need the quality product when we are trading outside our continent. We shouldn't remember the quality when we are trading with Europe, with America, with Asia. No, we should understand that the quality should be embedded in the value chains. And the other part on standardization, the standards bring in the component of value addition. We have, the value addition is very key. When you look at the value chains, we should think about our essence. Our essence. We cannot develop without our essence. Elsewhere, all development are built on SMEs. We have the youth, we have the women, as what Yavi was talking about. How do we help these small and medium and micro enterprises? We have on the continent under also what we call maturity model, certification with maturity, where we help SMEs to be certified at bronze level, silver level, gold level, and platinum level, looking at their market. That is the major problem. If you are trading at the national level, at the continental level and international level, yeah, we tell you what to do and showing you the requirements to be able to trade at national, to trade at continental, and to trade at the global level. Those are very important issues that we should take into consideration, because in many countries, when you look at the way the business sector take the National Bureau of Standards or the regulators, Food and Drug Authorities and others, they take them as police. As police, they fear them. They fear them. They cannot approach them. But that is not the role. The role of the Bureau of Standards, the role of those regulators is to help our industry to grow and to conform to those standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hermogene, and reminding all the business people here and everybody who is in trade, there's a reason for standards, and it's important to protect the citizen. And like you say, we have to build that trust culture. It always amazes me that when we're exporting, like you said, outside the continent, we adhere to that. But then internally, domestically, we don't. So it has to be ingrained in the culture of all businesses, whether you're exporting to another African country or to the rest of the world, that quality is key, because that is what protects the citizen. And especially the SMEs, we need to be able to build capacity on that. So thank you very much for sharing with us the work that you're doing and why continentally we need to do this work around standards. All right. So I'd like to go ahead and just get one more round of questions before we go to the audience, so that we can be able to answer, the panelists can answer any questions that they may have. So the next question for you is for you, Mr. Waleed. We know that AfCFTA will enable more trade in services, right? And earlier you talked about you've been very focused on medical tourism in Africa. And of course, that's very important because healthcare is very critical when we talk about health in nations. And for us to be able to implement the AfCFTA, we need all the resources, including human resources. So can you share with us the vision that you have in regards to medical tourism on the continent and the work that you're doing in Egypt to make sure that if we need these services, these medical services, we don't need to go outside the continent, we could actually do that on the continent. Welcome, Mr. Waleed. Sorry, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you again. Actually, one of the good things about the AfCFTA, it was not limited to trading goods. So, and it's really a very comprehensive package, including trading goods, trading services, competition, investment, e-commerce and digital trade, IPRs, and of course, women and youth in trade. So in Africa, the percentage of services sector to the GDP is around, right now is around 53%. The more the advanced economy, the more we advance, the more the importance of the service goes in the economy. For example, in the advanced economies like in Europe, the services sector represent between 65% and 75%, depend on the country. So this is about the services, and I think one of the most important opportunities that we have in this sector lies in the health and the medical sector, in the medical services. Why is that? For the moment, we have African people spending around $6 billion for treatment outside the continent. I'm not saying that we can eliminate all these 6 billion. Some of the cases it's required to go abroad, but at least we can save 50% of this amount by directing people to get the service within the continent. And the health sector, or this service sector, it has a very different characteristic, and it has a huge advantage. Why is that? The first thing is that by nature, the medical sector is very well regulated, but it's not protected. So government will welcome very much investors in this sector. We welcome very much international entities coming to the country to operate to the country, because this means like I save money, I save the travel cost for my people to go abroad. So it is really very well regulated by nature, you know, because it deals with health, but it is not really protected as other services. So this is one thing. The other one, government will always welcome professionals, doctors, to come to work, whether permanently or temporary in the country. This will be a learning experience for our national doctors, our people working in this sector, and still we are going to benefit by saving cost of traveling abroad. The third characteristic of this service is that a small amount of investment can make a big difference. For example, let us say in Kenya, only one hospital is attracting a lot of international patients from Africa, especially from West Africa, but even I know people coming from Nigeria, the far west, to get the treatment in Kenya. And I mean, what I want to say is that it's one major big hospital with a normal investment can make a huge difference with the advancement of the sector in the country. And the fourth one is that specialization is very much applicable in this sector. For example, you find Kenya is very, very famous in organ transplant. You find Egypt is very, very famous for oncology or cardiology. You find South Africa is very, very famous for heart transplant and orthopedic. So specialization here, we can cooperate within the continent and not compete in a way or another. Okay, then when we having this sector developed in this way, this means that we have increasing number of people having the treatment in the continent, and of course decreasing the cost and saving some of the foreign exchange that is very much needed for infrastructure, even for the health sector by itself. Needless to say that treatment in medical service within the continent, the major medical destination in the continent, is at least 50% less than in Dubai, for example, or 25% less than in India. And of course, we are not going to compare with Europe or the US, because we are very much cheaper. So what we need to do in order to benefit more or to enhance our services in this sector, I think within the continent, we have to adopt a unified system of medical visa. So African nationals can apply subject to satisfy all the requirements, whatever the requirements. When they satisfy these requirements, they have to get the medical visa in a very short time. The second one is that we have to focus on establishing center of excellence. Like, as I said, for example, Kenya has one hospital or few hospitals, but they are very, very advanced in medical research. We can do this. We can copy this experience in other small economies, and it will not cost us a lot of money, and it's very, very much doable. The third thing is that we have to get use of our citizens educated and working abroad, our doctors. I'm sure 50% of our patients going to UK for treatment, they are treated whether by Nigerian, Kenyan, Egyptians. I'm not exaggerating. So we have to get use of this fortune abroad by inviting them from time to time to come here. And by doing this, we are saving the cost of sending 100 patients. They will get treated in the same place by the doctor come to visit our country. After we do this, then we can look forward to export our service, our health and medical services. For example, I'll give you an example. In the UK, the National Health System, the NHS, they have a long waiting list for non-urgent medical operation, like whatever. And they started because of this, because of the high cost of these medical operations, they're starting to send patients to India. And it's very, very much applicable that we can start inviting or having deal with the NHS in UK to sending patients to our medical destination, and also some other medical operations like dental implant or plastic surgeries is not covered by any medical insurance in Europe, for example. And people tend to go abroad to do it because it's much it's less cheap. This is basically what I want to say about medical tourism in Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Waleed, for really painting that picture about the opportunities that I think a lot of us don't see, and they are there. And especially AfCFTA will make sure that it happens. It was baffling to hear that we are spending 6 billion outside the continent. 6 billion. And yet, like you said, whether you go to UK or you go to US, many of the doctors are from this continent. And
exactly.
Many, I remember because I lived in the US for many, many years. A lot of my friends were all nurses, right? So healthcare industry, the personnel there is really from Africa, or Africans have the ability to do that, but we spend most of our money out of there. So the opportunity to have centers of excellence, like you said, whether in certain African countries, would be a great thing to do. And like you said, the opportunity also is to say, in this case for the UK, can they export, can they send the patients to Egypt or send their patients to any other African country to actually take up these healthcare opportunities. And for these trading services to happen in medical services, it does two things. There's medical tourism, like you mentioned. So now when you bring in a patient, they don't come alone. So that means hotels, long-term stay, that will create opportunity. At the same time, also with these hospitals, it's always real estate, right? So you have to build the real estate and the polarization of that. So thank you for painting that picture, the fact that there's opportunity, that when we open up our borders with AfCFTA, we do capacity building, we invest on the continent, then we can be able to see more trading services, especially medical tourism. So thank you very much for that. So the next question we'll have is for you, Mr. Hermogene, and because of time, if you could just keep it brief, could you share with us what you think? And I'm giving here a timeline. We're in 2022, and we know that we are with the Africa Union. We have Agenda 2063, which is 40 years from now, because we want to see the Africa we want. So what do you think needs to be done in 2023 to ensure that AfCFTA is being implemented and it's successful and we're seeing industrialization happening? So that's the time frame. What do we need to do in 2023 to make sure that we achieve the Africa we want in 2063? Welcome, Mr. Hermogene.
Thank you, Anne. I think it's a good question to reflect on. The main thing that we should do is talk, mobilize people. Yeah, that's the main thing. What our continent, this population of 1.3 billion of people, do they understand the opportunities or within the safety agreement? Let's reach out. Yeah, we should reach out to all the corners and focus. We are a continent of youth. Focus on youth. Focus on how can we create jobs. We cannot create jobs if we don't industrialize. We cannot create jobs if we don't trade to one another. But we need to show people the opportunities. We have the 8 regional economical communities, those recognized by African Union, but we still think about REX. We are not thinking about the continent. And it's really pity when I think about this, because when we think about these regional economical communities, let's give an example for East Africa community, which was 3 countries, yeah, at the beginning. Then now, how many countries we have? It was Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. Now we have Rwanda, we have Burundi, we have South Sudan, we have now DRC. Why do we still think about regional economical communities while we know even those regional economical communities are open for other members? Let's think continental. Let's have the regional economical communities as building blocks, and let's focus on the youth. If we can create jobs for the youth, if we can add value to what we produce, we can move forward. Meaning that let's produce what we consume. Let's not produce for other people. Because when we produce for other people, we are not creating the value added what we want on the continent. We produce what we don't consume. That's the main issues. When we talk, we will understand. We shouldn't trade because there is COVID. We should trade because we should trade as a continent. Thank you.
Wow. Challenge accepted. And I believe a lot of people who are watching us on Zoom events, and we also have people on LinkedIn, have had that, Mr. Hermogene. We need to produce what we consume. That is what I got from you. Value addition is very key. And of course, that ties into standardization. And you mentioned that we need to think continental. But the other thing you mentioned is really about communication and understanding the opportunities that AfCFTA does. And that is the work that we're doing at Regal Africa, making sure that we are not only speaking to policymakers, right? It's only not only about the public sector, but we're talking also to the private sector. We're talking to everyone who is involved in trade so that people take up this opportunity. So thank you very much. And next, we're going to talk to Yavi before we go to the questions. I know Yavi is very big on communication. In fact, when Mr. Hermogene mentioned communication, first name on my mind was Yavi and the work she continuously does at AfCFTA in all levels around communication. So my question for you really, Yavi, is around not communication, because I know you do a lot of that, but really around digital transformation, right? So when we're talking about AfCFTA industrialization, we cannot remove technology out of it, right? We are in this new age in Africa where we're promoting more trade on the continent. So can you share with us what you see is the role of technology as we push development on the continent, especially when we talk about AfCFTA and making sure that our goods, our services are consumed on the continent and we have more intra-Africa trade. What is the role of technology? Welcome, Yavi.
Thank you. You know, the whole thing about digitalization, and I'm a techie first before I'm anything else. So once the AfCFTA operationalizes, it is going to be digitalization that activates it. And when I say activates it, meaning that it's not activated as yet, and truly, fully, functionally, where we are using it, where it's, and I loved what our keynote speaker said when she said the AfCFTA is not at the Secretariat. The AfCFTA is with us. SG Wambui always says that the AfCFTA is not him. The AfCFTA is for Africa's 1.3 billion people. And therein lies the issue around digitalization, because actually the fact that COVID came, actually the fact that it was delayed by a couple of months in terms of the Opera Cup coming into effect, meant that we all had to take to online platforms to start driving the AfCFTA agenda, to start talking about the AfCFTA agenda. And you and I are here. We have never met each other, but we have spoken so many times on platforms and channels about the AfCFTA. We are here because of digitalization. We are here, and how many people have you engaged with from a digital perspective on the AfCFTA? So from a technology aspect, the digitalization and the impact on AfCFTA has already started to happen. However, when we look at it now in terms of activation, the accelerator is next going to be trade and services, like Waleed spoke about. Technology fast-tracked the way we work in the world of work, and the future of work that we used to speak about is now our current and our present. So when we look at it, the world of work has changed. The way we engage has changed. You and I couldn't be at one conference and be at your conference at the same time. Our keynote speaker could never have done that. The world of work has changed. And because of that, the AfCFTA trade agenda is going to change because of services. Technically, we are providing services right now. And that means that things like management consulting, legal advice, medical advice, et cetera, that becomes exponentially larger in terms of trade and services. So that next accelerator under the AfCFTA is going to be trade and services. And a key component of that is going to be the ability to be able to use digital or digitalization in terms of being able to activate it. And then secondly, lastly, that because I won't go into too much detail, is the e-commerce platforms. So when we look at it, we live in the platform economy. Africa had the most number of e-commerce platform startups in the last 2 to 3 years over COVID. Kenya is obviously a hub in terms of technology and digitalization, so a lot came out of there. But, and this is what I foresee, I'm not saying that it's happening already. I'm saying that this is what I think is going to happen. So I could be very, very badly wrong. But in terms of our research at PABWA, in terms of our, our think tank, this is what we're coming up with at the moment. Our research is not finished, is that we are going to have to diversify before we can scale. And what do I mean by that? Is that we need to accept and understand that Africa's trust deficit means that our e-commerce platforms will have an explosive start. So it has already had an explosive start. It's massive, it's huge, we take off. Everybody wants to sell online. Everybody wants to create services online, training platforms, all of those kind of things are happening. However, it could easily just fizzle out if we don't build levels of trust through verification and backout processes. In order to build that trust over a long period of time. So we've got short-term plans, we need to have medium-term issues, risk management, and we need to have long-term accountability. We have to show intention, and we have to show willingness to be trusted. So that comes across maybe in our marketing, maybe that comes across in our communication. So therein lies the connection between, or the intersection of technology and humanity, or in our case, as ABSA likes to call it, our Africanacity, right? So that intersection is where digital and communication and the humanity will come forward, is that we now need to create that trust in our digital and online reach. And linked to that, is our PAPS, obviously. So when PAPS was launched, that was a key indicator for us, for the rest of us, from the Secretariat, from the African powers that be, is that trade under the AfCFTA is going to be optimized through digital payments. So here's my issue. Obviously, because there's guarantees within those within the PAP system. There's levels of trust that I was just talking about that already is there because it's a Brixim bank, etc., etc., etc. So let's consider what that means now for the digital divide in Africa. You know, those preconditions I was speaking about earlier, the digital divide in Africa, because if we are driving an agenda of digital payments, what happens to the people who are not or don't have access to digital and online? And worse is the gender digital divide, which is the largest in the world. So these are the kind of things that we need to look at from a digitalization perspective, both positive and negative, in terms of implementation and going forward, and how the AfCFTA will be impacted. And I'm sure your digital trade section tomorrow or today, I'm not sure, is going to kind of unpack that in a much more detailed way, and you'll get more technical feedback. Yeah, that's just kind of the overarching things that we're picking up from our research and development and our knowledge base.
Thank you, Yavi. So yeah, in fact, when you're talking, I was just thinking, you know, this conference would not have happened without technology, right? In fact, just before this, we were having a discussion with my team, the fact that we had envisioned it to be hybrid. There are a few changes, but things happened this week. There were some issues with Kenya Airways, which is the pride of Africa. And we were saying, oh my God, if we were actually to get people to Kenya, that would have been a nightmare. But because of technology, then we still have the conference going on. And like you said, you're not in Kenya. Our keynote speaker is in Egypt. I know some of my speakers were in Egypt for COP27. You couldn't do two conferences at the same time. So technology is really helping us connect, do business, talk to one another, and that is how the AfCFTA will happen. You also mentioned really about our digital trade. So yeah, tomorrow we'll unpack more around digital payments, credit platforms. So thank you again for sharing with us more around technology and why it's very important when we talk about AfCFTA and industrialization. We do have a few questions that have come in, and I will just go ahead and share the questions so that either you, Waleed, or Mr. Hermogene can be able to answer that. We have a question here from Laon Daga. She talks about, her question is, innovation is key to industrialization in Africa. As we saw with COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the innovation came from the informal sector. Part of what makes innovation easy in the informal sector is the lack of red tape and prohibitive startup costs that are associated with formalization. So, but then she adds on to say, however, industrial policies tend to speak formality. Is there space for designing new measures of innovation in Africa that include the informal sector? And how do we ensure the push for formality does not stifle innovation? So a couple of things here: innovation and the informal economy, right? We're pushing the agenda for formalization. I know I push that, maybe because I come from a finance background. I can't lend to the informal sector, honestly. So we need more formalized businesses on the continent. But her question really is around innovation and the informal sector. So maybe Yavi could start on, and maybe Mr. Hermogene can share more in regards to what you think about that. Welcome, Yavi.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's exactly that, right? So if you look at it, and there is something happening on the continent at the moment. It's not very far ahead, but it's somewhere. So if you look at it, so obviously I also come from a finance background, so everything's got to be a certain way and certain structures. However, we live in a world where our credits and our banking systems were structured by the colonization era. So, you know, people had streets and houses and those kind of things in most parts of our colonization or colonizer countries. But Africa doesn't look like that. Africa has parts that have got informal settlements. You know, I'm looking at one through my window across the way, you know, so this is where we are at. So how do we now use technology to be able to create structures, become innovative in terms of the African life? How do we start to get, so one of the things that I think, just to cut this short, one of the things that I think we need to look at, and as I said, it's already starting to be looked at, is that we need to have a technology-based system that is able to capture data and information that then conforms to the formal structures of banking. So for example, if Mama is sitting on the side of the road and selling her, you know, her honey or her wares or whatever the case is, that she's sitting on the side of the road, that is an informal sector. She gets cash. There is no way of tracking, first of all, her domicilium, which the credit system requires, her ID document, which a credit system requires and which she may have. But more importantly, there's no way of tracking her business and her business activity, which is what all banks and all financial structures would require. So what if, and all of us have a little thing called, a little thing called a mobile device or some kind of device, even Mama sitting on the side of the road. How do we use that piece of equipment to be able to track those transactions and then formalize those transactions? Because it is not about the transactions not happening, it's about the transactions not being formally tracked. That becomes the issue from a financial perspective. So innovation and innovative thinking, as I said, the intersection of humanity and technology is going to be how the AfCFTA starts to become a success in terms of digitalization. And that is what I'm giving you, one simple example of how we need to look at stuff in order to be able to say, right, fine, here is activity. How do we track activity differently? Because it's not coming into a bank account, or is there a way to be able to track certain things, to be able to get management accounts, for example, and not necessarily financial statements, so she can get $500 or $1,000. It doesn't have to be $50,000. And therein lies the story of access to finance in terms of the informal sector. I'm literally just giving you one silly example. There are obviously 100 behind it that we could explore at a different time.
Right. Thank you, Yavi, for that. In fact, when you're talking, because like I mentioned, I come from banking background. Tracking transactions is what we need, right? We need to make sure, and what I've been pushing is really about cash flow funding versus collateral-based funding. That way you also bring in the women and youth, because we need to Africanize the way we do trade and investments. We can't do it how the rest of the world has done. So we really, really need to focus on that. I don't know, Mr. Waleed, if you have an answer to that particular question around informal economy and innovation, because we have the next question that we will reach out to Mr. Hermogene, really talking about the rest. So maybe you can speak on that, Mr. Waleed.
Yes, actually, I would like to talk about the trade policies that can help convert the informal sector to formal. And the most important thing is that reduce the barriers to the formal sectors. You don't have to require ease everything for formal sector. Give them a grace period of 3 years, 5 years. You don't require anything. Give them some incentives like a social protection or life insurance policy. You know, like when you come to us, you don't have we don't require you to do anything, and also you will have some benefits. And then the people will experience this, the taste of informal sector, and things will develop from that. This is one thing that I really want to stress. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I absolutely agree. A lot of people say informal because it's just too cumbersome to be formal. So if we reduce those barriers, that will definitely help. So Mr. Hermogene, there's a question I think specifically for you from the audience, from from Soji Awubade. So they say, you mentioned something about the REX. If we de-emphasize the REX, we may lose some of the takeoff momentum that we do have from their track and learning, right? So their question is, are they thinking the right way? Because you mentioned we need to be thinking continental, and that's of course why we're here talking about the AfCFTA, but for us, for example, I'm in Kenya, the East Africa community has done a lot of work that we probably need to learn from. In fact, that would be the next topic we'll be discussing in another panel. What is your take on it? That is the question the gentleman is asking.
The rates will continue to be building blocks. The trade that is happening in the rates will not stop. Yeah, it is actually to leverage on what we are learning from the rates. But also remember, if you look at Kenya, Kenya is in COMESA. Kenya is in East Africa community. Yeah, just two. Yeah. If you look at, I can give you a country which is in 5 regional economical community right now. And when you look at the standards, in all those protocol on trade, they say that if you adopt a standard, withdraw the conflicting standard. Are you going to adopt a standard being used in East Africa, being used in ECAS, being used in SADC, being used in COMESA? Because those overlapping issues, yeah, it also creates some confusion, technically some confusion. That's the main issue. Those regs were created. Let's give an example of tripartite. The tripartite East Africa community, the SADC and COMESA, was actually happening because we wanted to see the experience within the tripartite to see if we can create the AfCFTA. We need to understand the reason behind the Abuja Treaty that created the regional economical communities, that it was toward this AfCFTA. That's the reason I am saying, let's remember that the regional economical communities were there and are still there to bring in the experience, but the milestone is when we're gonna reach a level that we say, oh, we are happy with what is happening at the continental level, and we can trade, forgetting that we started with 3 countries or 2 countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that and really saying, yes, the regional economic communities are the building blocks as we then move on to continental. And I think I'll be speaking about that later on. So because of time, we have just one more question that I'd like each one of you to answer, and also as you answer, maybe have your last remarks. And really, it's a focus on what we've been discussing this whole time during the last 1 hour. So the question for each one of you, and I'll start with you, Mr. Waleed. The AfCFTA is a game changer in regards to improving intra-Africa trade. What do you think needs to be done to ensure implementation and incentivizing the business community to increase their market share in other countries? What do you think is the game changer to improve intra-Africa trade on the continent? Welcome, Mr. Waleed.
Maybe Anne, I had raised a hand. I want to, just before the panelists, and my question was to Yavi on the prospective fund. I'm John Bosco Carissa, the CEO of East African Business Council. Pleased to be on this call. So Yavi, I wanted to hear more just on this prospective fund for industrialization, and how are you going to, how the REX Business Council are going to benefit from it. I'm organizing a high-level investment forum in Zanzibar at the end of this month, and it would be an opportunity for you to come, and I invite you to share that insight on what you are doing with the Prosperity Fund. Thank you very much.
I would say reach out to me so that we can let Anne finish her panel. So just reach out to me. We're all over social media. Reach out to me, and Anne has my email address. So yeah, you can reach out to me and we can have a discussion, and I can give you more detail. It obviously, I can't go through the detail now just because we're stretched for time. But yeah, there's more than enough information that's already available online, and absolutely reach out to me. No worries.
Thank you, Yavi. Thank you, Mr. Kalisa, for your question. Yes, we need more information around the Africa Prosperity Fund. And because of time, we're not able to do that right now. But as Ms. Yavi shares that with us in other forums, or if she shares with us, we will be very clear we will be able to share that to our audience, our people interested in that. And the power of connection. So here we are online, and Yavi has been invited to come to East Africa for another event. So that's amazing. So Mr. Kalisa, if you could just bear with us because of time, we'll have Ms. Yavi talk to you after the conference backstage. Thank you. So we'll go in right now, and Mr. Waleed, as you are preparing the question that I asked around the AfCFTA, you could answer that around what is the game changer to improve intra-Africa trade?
Well, you mentioned something about the increased market share for African countries, and I was just looking previously about trade between Nigeria and Egypt, a total population of 350 million of population, and a total trade of 200 million between the two countries. So with a simple calculation, that means that every citizen in these two countries consume annually 26% of products of the other country. This is, and if you take out the oil and oil products from the equation, I mean, this value will decrease more and more. So what I wanted to say is that really in our trade and our market share is really very important to increase, very important to do something about it, especially with countries that for the moment does not have any preferential treatment. So what we should do, in my point of view, the first thing is that to enhance, Yavi said something about digitalization and information and technology, and so we have to get use of this. We have to enhance our access to information in other African markets, whatever concerning production, consumption. This is very, very difficult to have right now, apart from export and import statistics. Information about producers, information about traders. Lately, the Nigerian government launched a formal B2B platform where countries have to register. I mean, they have to be legally checked before they go into this platform. So when we do trade on this platform, at least we know that there is certain amount of credibility exists within this platform. I give you an example. For example, a huge amount of trade done with Europe, with companies, between companies that never met, that never see each other. They spend like 5-10 years without seeing each other, and the trade is going very well. Why is that? Because there is enough amount of credible information. So this is one most important thing that we really have to do. The second one is that for the private sector, they have to go in the continent. They have to go into larger joint ventures by creating the mass that I talked about before, economy of scale for these companies. This will increase their competitiveness and increase their market share in the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Waleed, for that. Mr. Hermogene, if you could just give us your last remarks, and if you can share with us what you think is the game changer in regards to the AfCFTA and in regards to increase of market share in African countries.
One key thing is mobilization. The second is mobilization, and the third is mobilization. Yeah. That is what we should do. Yeah, people should know what is a AfCFTA, what is the benefit, yeah, and what we should do as a continent. mindset, change of mindset. Do not think that the shoe that you should put on should be from elsewhere, other than Egypt or Kenya or somewhere. Do not think about just wearing the suit from Italy. Let's start changing our mindset. Thank you.
Thank you. Mindset and transformation of the mind. That is exactly the mission that we have through the Africa Conference Series, transforming the lives of Africans. So thank you for Mr. Hermogene for reminding us that we need to mobilize. Thank you for your last remarks. And for you, Mrs. Yavi, could you share with us your last remarks and also tie that in regards to game changer to make sure AfCFTA is successful?
Well, Dr. Hermogene gave me the segue in. One of the things that we're not talking about it because we don't like to talk about it as Africa, or we only talk about it when something happens, or we're not, I don't know what the reason is that we're not talking about it. But whenever I mention it, people kind of just, you know, they look at me strangely. And unfortunately, those things don't bother me. But here's my issue. In a continent that is fraught with xenophobia, where people land in my country and they are treated like enemies. We land in some other country and foreigners are treated better than us. So we are a continent that is fraught with xenophobia. We don't treat each other like brothers and sisters. We say brothers and sisters. We don't treat each other like that from a policy, regulation, and framework perspective. We now want to trade with each other. How? How are we now going to create desirability for each other's products when we don't even like each other, if I can put it that way? We like each other sometimes. We like some of each other. We don't necessarily like all of each other. All 55 nations don't necessarily love each other dearly, and for various reasons. But the point I'm trying to make is that the AfCFTA is a channel. The AfCFTA makes it easier for us to trade. The AfCFTA removes boundaries and challenges and obstacles and whatever else. It doesn't force us to trade. So we need to start. There's a Made in Africa protocol, there's rules of origin, there's all of these kind of policies and processes, and once again, documentation that is going to instruct us and dictate to us about how it will be done. But no one is talking about the psychology of wanting to buy from each other. So the reason I said it's a segue from Dr. Hermogene is because when are we going to enjoy the fact that we don't want a suit from Italy, but we actually want a suit from Kenya? When do we enjoy the fact that we don't want French champagne, we actually want Méthode Cap Classique from South Africa? When are we going to understand that that is what we want? But when are we going to want it? And that is the psychology of it. So we can have lots of policies. The AfCFTA will be implemented. It will be operationalized because there's all of us driving it from behind the scenes. But it's going to come down to whether people actually want to buy. You can have as many e-commerce platforms. You can have as much PAPs as you want to. If I don't want to buy from another African country, I'm not going to. So brand Africa and African made and made in Africa and all of those kind of things are lovely, but we now need to start driving the psychology of unity and not just talking about it. I must want to buy things from other African countries. I'm the consumer, and therein lies, I think, the biggest game changer is our psychology. It's our humanity that now needs to be looked at from a unity perspective. So for me, that's the biggest thing, is that how do we get past that? And should we not be looking at a brand Africa agenda now and not later on, you know, when everything is operationalized? So this is just my kind, and obviously social media and digital media give us the option to do that. So how are we going to use that and those kind of things? But for me, that's the biggest issue around the game changer that we are not necessarily seeing or we've seen it, we don't want to talk about it, you know, that angle, but it is there and it needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Yavi. When you were talking, I was just nodding my head because I agree in totality, transformation of the mindset beyond policy, right? So beyond policy, what we do, and we need to push the agenda of Brand Africa. I personally am always wearing African or consuming African brands. In fact, for everyone who will stay at the conference, you will see us highlight African brands, because you cannot buy and consume things you don't know, you don't trust. That's where standards come in. We have to change that narrative that African goods are substandard, right? So we need to build African brands. We need to consume what we produce. I'm rephrasing what each one of you is saying. We need to take up the services, don't have to go beyond. So what I would have to say to end this conversation is I appreciate the time you've taken to share everything that you do on the continent with your organization, because Africa is changing. Africa is transforming. The next generation of Africans will have a bright future. And it's because of the work that you continuously do in the organizations that you do. And I look forward to continuously work with all of you to push the agenda for AfCFTA, go beyond policy, and reach the point of implementation that everyone is affected and we create wealth. Because at Regal Africa, we say it's all about creating wealth, and specifically creating generational wealth, whether it's in families, whether it's in community, and generational wealth for Africans all over the world. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Bye.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the rest of it. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.